Hi everybody, this is a preview of the game Red Tide South, and for those of you that are fans of Red Tide West, I wanted to show you a little preview of Red Tide South. This game is playable in combination with Red Tide West, but it's also an independent game, which is to say that it's effectively its own scenario as well. You can play it either way, either in conjunction with Red Tide West as a super kind of combined game. This would combine, as you can see, the Italian theater, if you want to call it that, with the normal game, the normal Soviet invasion of West Germany. And but I thought I'd give you a little preview of a playtest game. This is the last playtest game that the game is going to get. So far, it's working really great, and I'm really happy with how it came out. And I just kind of wanted to give you a little bit of a preview of the game so far and touch on a couple things that I think players will find interesting. These are printed components. One of the things I want to mention is if you look closely at the roads have pretty much all throughout the map and the cities and everything else, there's a misalignment there with the printing. Now, I made this map, this is my map, but when I submitted the map, it didn't have this error. Something happened after it got into Decision Games' hands, and I don't know if this happened in layout or at their printers or what. I have been talking to Doug Johnson, the managing game developer at Decision Games, about having the map reprinted. I hope they will do that. From what Doug tells me, it sounds to me like it was an error on their printer's end, and in that case, I guess the printer's on the hook for the cost of reprinting all these maps. So anyway, cross your fingers and we'll hope that Decision Games does that. But in any case, this is the game, and what's interesting about this is that this is the group of Soviet forces in the south. This was the Soviet army that was designated to kind of invade Italy. There were two possible approaches coming out of Hungary. These are the Soviet units that are based in Hungary in the late 80s. They could have gone into Austria, and that's really the only access route to get into Italy. But you can see all those mountains there, and what a pain in the butt that would be, huh? And unless you've got, you know, massive airborne forces or something like that, you're going to have to slog your way through those mountains. The other option was to come through Yugoslavia. Now, Yugoslavia at this time was kind of semi-neutral, and they were, historically, they're sympathetic to the Russians, and they were communist, nominally speaking. And so if the Russians want to come through Yugoslavia, this game presumes that the Yugoslavians are going to allow it, but essentially they're going to retain their neutral status and try to avoid becoming embroiled in World War III. So that's really the only way that this can happen, this front here. And for those of you that are familiar with World War I and recall all the fighting that occurred in this area, a lot of that is going to repeat itself. Now, the Soviets, with their relatively diminutive army coming out of Hungary, and with the Hungarian forces as well, they're going to come screaming down this road, which you can see they've already started to do. And this is the opening turn for the Warsaw Pact. And the red are obviously Soviet units, and then we've got some Hungarian units. Those are the kind of brown units with the yellow NATO symbol, the mustard NATO symbol. So they're coming out of Hungary. They're coming down this road. These roads are everything, because to move through these mountains, especially with the peaks, you can see one right there, and where the forests are, it's really difficult. And so now the Soviets, they've got a couple of air mobile units. In fact, I think you can see a Hungarian air mobile unit there right in the middle, and there's a Russian air mobile unit. If you're playing this game as the Soviet units, don't get those guys killed. They're not a lot of strength points. As you can see, the Hungarian unit is a 1-1, and but the the combat modifier that they add and their movement ability is really handy to have. Now, in the last game I played, I foolishly sent them off on this kind of a foray across the Adriatic Sea here, and I captured some sort of coastal town, and I thought I was being cute, trying to draw off Italian units from the Po Valley, which is exactly what happened, and of course the Italian units in the Po Valley came down and wiped those guys out. Well, later on, when a lot of the fighting occurred in this area, boy, I really would have loved to have had those air mobile units, and you only get 2. So word to the wise is sufficient. Don't get those guys killed off. They're really, really handy, and I'll let you figure out what you can do with them. But don't repeat my mistake. Make good use out of those guys because they're very handy. Their movement and their ability to kind of swing around behind other units, and there's a concentric modifier in the game that you can take advantage of, and there's all sorts of things you can do with these guys. So anyway, enough about that. So here we go. We've got the opening Soviet move, and the Soviets are coming out of Hungary, and they're coming down this road, and they can make pretty good progress coming down that road. And according to the rules, because Yugoslavia is effectively neutral, although they are allowing the Soviets to kind of cruise through here because they want to stay out of the war, and that kind of limits the Soviets to taking these roads here. And that's the fastest way to get through Yugoslavia. But as you can see, that's as far as they've gotten on turn 1. Now by turn 2, they're going to get way down this road, and they're going to end up in this area. However, these are the starting Italian force dispositions. These are actual setup hexes, according to the rules. In other words, this is not a player setup. This is how the Italian army actually is set up in 1988. And any smart Italian player is not going to just sit there. He's going to take these Italian units, which are not terribly strong. You know, you see you've got a lot of 1-strength units, and there's a 0-strength engineer you can see, and a 0-strength artillery. And that artillery unit is mostly good for his combat CRT shift, which is that 1 up in the upper left-hand corner. That's what he's most useful for. And, you know, you've got a couple of 2-strength units, and this really reflects kind of the organization of the Italian army at this time. However, as weak as these Italian units might seem, most of them are double-sided, so they have some resiliency. And what is more, you get these Italian units up in these mountains here and in these forests and things like that, and they are really tough to dig out, especially if you position them well. So don't count these guys out. They are a bitch, if I may coin a phrase. They are a bitch to dig out. So, and of course the Italians got a whole slew of other units. Once the Italian player figures out that the Soviets aren't going to come through Austria, which they can do, that is an option. But of course then the Soviets have to fight the Austrians. So in this game, as the Soviet player, I'm not going to be doing that. I'm not going to mess with the Austrians. I'm not going to try to go through all those mountains and forests and whatever. Forget that, right? So anyway, but once the Italians figure that out, they can start pulling all these Italian units from all over the Po Valley region and start bringing it up here and get kind of situated in these hills. And boy, there's a fight there. So anyway, so the Italians, if the Italian player knows what he's doing, he's going to bring these Italians into the difficult terrain here, and the Soviets are really going to have a fight on their hands. Now, the Soviets have a superiority in the air. They've got a lot of air units, and you can see some of them based here and there, and this isn't even all the Soviet air units that will eventually show up during the course of the game. Others come in as reinforcements. There were Soviet air units that were in the Kiev military district. They'd be coming down here and things like that. By the way, in the combined game, the Soviet player actually has the option to shift his air units, his air unit reinforcements as he sees fit. So, but in this game, we're not playing with Red Tide West. We're just assuming that the Kiev military district air units have come on down, and that's going to give the Russians quite an advantage in the air. And in fact, that's pretty much the only thing that gives the Soviets any chance at all, the Soviets and the Hungarians, because the Italians can stop them dead cold in this difficult terrain. Also, another word to the wise for the Soviet player, make use of the chemical warfare bonus. I played a playtest game where I purposefully did not use the chemical warfare modifier. In this scenario, there's no penalty for using it. If you play it with Red Tide West, there's a penalty when it comes to possible tactical nuclear exchanges. But in the singular Red Tide South scenario, there's no reason not to use it, and go ahead and use it. When I tried to play the game without it, just because I wanted to see how far the Soviets could get just fighting conventionally, they pretty much got just up to about the Italian border, and they made some progress and they made some inroads, but they just could not break into Italy without the modifier that they get for the chemical warfare. So don't be bashful about using those chem. Just use them and do what you got to do to break into Italy. So, all right, well, listen, there it is. That's kind of a preview of Red Tide South. I hope you got something out of this. I'm not going to go into a lot in the way of tactics or strategies. I make it a rule not to do that because I like to let players figure that all out for themselves. I think the games are a lot more fun that way. But I did want to kind of touch on a couple of the basics. Don't get those air mobile guys killed off prematurely. And just remember that you got to use that chemical warfare bonus. So anyway, there you are. This is Red Tide South, and I'll do another video later and kind of show you how this particular test game evolved, and you can kind of draw your own conclusions about the game. The game is it's all very historical in terms of the forces that are included and their dispositions and everything like that. So this is essentially what it would have been like had the Soviets tried to go into Italy. And what I learned after designing this game was that, you know, the war was really going to be decided, World War III in the late 80s, it was really going to be decided in Western Europe, in West Germany. That's where things were going to be decided. This is kind of a sideshow, and it helps to kind of keep the Italians distracted or keep them tied up or whatever. I don't know how seriously the Soviets really thought they were going to break into Italy with this relatively small Soviet army they've got here. But you, in the role of the Soviet commander, your job is to break into Italy and take Italy out or cause a lot of trouble or whatever. And of course, as the Italian player, you want to do everything you can to keep Russian units out of Italy. And in the larger context of a combined Red Tide West, Red Tide South game, it provides a very interesting adjunct to the Third World War in Europe as a whole. So anyway, there you go. Hope you enjoyed this. I'll do another video again later, and signing off for now.